rising to the streets.
The point that I was, that I was really talking about before, and I hope not belaboring it, is that there is a pendulum in the economy.
Right.
It swings back and forth.
What experience
And when times are bad,
right.
I think at that time this American notion about being self-sufficient and all is viewed differently than when things are bad. When things are good, everybody is John Wayne.
Right.
When things are bad, everybody is Henry Fonda.
Grapes of Wrath.
And the Grapes of Wrath.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's it's unfortunate that there isn't more consistency. Right? I think that's a big issue, because I fear very much that the pendulum swings in the future are going to get worse rather than better. I mean, we have Janet Yellen doing whatever she can to keep things stable, but there are people who say that so much money has been printed that we are headed for a disaster sooner or later. And when that happens, it could be that what happened in 2008 and 9 will seem like a walk in the park. Things could get very, very bad, and the pendulum will swing very, very far. Right?
Well, maybe things have to get that bad for there to be a revolution.
People say,
right.
For there to be, I don't think you're talking about a shooting revolution, but somewhat of a radicalization of American politics, such as happened back in the 30s.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, politicians are not really afraid of the shooting revolution. The French are, because they've had that.
Well, Smith and Wesson is not afraid of that.
No, that would be
good times for them, huh?
Right.
Yeah, very good times.
Talking a highly hypothetical case here, but that whole John Wayne Henry Fonda image is kind of interesting, because you can't have too much John Wayne, because it's unrealistic, and you can't have too much Henry Fonda either. It's just when you have, if you equate John Wayne with pure capitalism, if you equate Henry Fonda with the need for some social programs, you can't. You've got to have those social programs in effect for the benefit of the people, especially when the economy's doing well. There's a good deal of affluence on the top, and the need for a greater safety net is necessary. So, but what I would like to mention, we haven't touched upon Bernie Williams. There I go again. That's the ball player.
He plays a guitar.
He plays a guitar
now.
And I guess it's the fact that the Mets went under so quickly that that baseball is still on my mind.
And the cat predicted
it. Shouldn't be, because you're a Mets fan.
Yeah, I know.
You should get
the Mets lost.
Get over it.
They did. I'm going to do my best, because there's always next year.
Here's a good simplification for you.
No, we really went off on a tangent.
Here's a good simplification for you. Now, the other show that I'm a co-host on, Basil Buddha Cat Presents! ! Basil predicted that Kansas City would win the World Series. And why would Kansas City win the World Series? Because Kansas City happens to have the letters C, A, T, and S in it, whereas obviously New York does not.
Right.
So that's why Kansas City. Why not?
Cat wisdom for you.
Cat wisdom. Yep.
So what was the subject you wanted to touch upon?
I want to touch upon Bernie Sanders, his foreign policy. I like to kind of bring that to the attention of people, because too much is said about ISIS and Syria, Iran, and people are thinking about the necessity for us to get involved in that mire, which it really is. I mean, I feel badly for how the individual citizens are being displaced, and the horrible situation as it is. But this it's an Islamic problem. These are Islamic countries.
It's a local issue for
basically
the most part. Yeah.
It's a local issue. We really should stay out of that.
Right.
All right, we really should stay out. Now, you got Iran. That's a powerful country. You got Saudi Arabia. That's a powerful country.
Yeah.
Okay, these two countries, okay, are at war.
Right.
There's a proxy war going on. Iran represents the Shiites, and Saudi Arabia represents the Sunnis. Now, why is all this insanity going on?
Right.
I'll tell you why. Because at the end of World War I, when the English and the French and the Russians decided to carve up the whole area,
Oh, wow.
they didn't carve it up with any interest of who lives there. They carved it up. Their interest was the natural resources, the oil, and whatever, how else they could benefit. So they had these countries, they had this area under colonization. And then finally, okay, they moved out. These people learned from them that we can sustain some power for ourselves with a strong man. A strong man that can keep these the religious differences and the ethnic differences under control, one way or another. And most of the time, it might be they might be able to do it brutally.
Is Sunni and Shia maybe the Eastern world's equivalent of the Western world's Catholic and Protestant?
Absolutely. We had to go through it, and there was no powers that interfered with it. We had to kill each other for about 100 years before somebody said, "Oh, now we got to stop this."
Right.
Okay, now they were prevented from killing each other because they were under the oppressed colonization of Europe.
Right.
Europe pulls out; they're under the oppressed control of the strong man, Hafez al-Assad. This goes back before the guy that's there now, Bashir, his father, Saddam Hussein, okay, in Iraq, all right.
The Ayatollah in Iran.
Yeah, and we interfered with that, you know, and we contributed to that. So what happens is there's something called the Arab Spring. Everybody figures, oh, well, you know, now that it's all breaking up, we're going to have democracy. Well, we thought that when we went into Iraq. Oh, we're going to liberate Iraq and we're going to put up a democracy. Well, as I said before, democracy depends on an enlightened electorate. In Egypt, if 20 million people are educated and 80 million people only know the Quran, who's going to get elected? Let's face it. All right, it's just you cannot have democracy just based on elections. You have to have an electorate that responds to it, and that's not easy. I mean, you know, we're barely making it with our electorate here. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the Shiites and the Sunnis, you got the Shiites in Iran, okay? You got a Shiite control in Syria. So Iran and Syria, they're working together to keep the Sunnis under control. In Iraq, you had Sunnis, you had a large population of Shiites. The Sunnis under Saddam Hussein were oppressing the Shiites. We went in there, looked around, saw that there was a majority of Shiites, and so somehow or other we left them with a Shiite government. The Shiite government was marginalizing the Sunnis that were there, so the Sunnis in the north all of a sudden grew in power when they got together to oppose the Shiites in Syria, and they realized, hey, we're ISIS now. We're going to set up our own country. Meanwhile, the Kurds, all right, they don't want to be oppressed by the Sunnis or the Shiites, so they're trying to maintain a little piece of the property. All right, but they're not on good spirits with the Turks. So, you know, this whole thing gets very, very complicated, extremely complicated. All right, another thing, too, is ISIS, they're so barbaric. They cut people's heads off. What do? We electrocute them. We used to hang them. Sometimes we shoot them. I mean,
there's enough barbarism to go around for pretty much every culture.
Yeah, it's there's insanity all over.
Yeah.
Wow.
That insanity we do not need to be a part of. We need to leave that alone and let them work it out. And they can work it out. The Saudis are so smart.
Right.
You know how much oil they sold us? And you know what they bought? They bought armaments. A tremendous amount of armaments. They've got the military capability of handling that situation. They're not going to bother ISIS right now. ISIS is Sunni. That whole wasabi mentality had its roots in Saudi Arabia. You follow? So they're not going to go in there. They went into Yemen because Yemen is right next door, and Shiites managed to get control of the government. Boom! They took care of that right away. All right, now here we are siding with the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia because we've done that since Eisenhower's time, and at the same time trying to negotiate an agreement with Iran to prevent them from getting nuclear power, nuclear weapons. These Islamic countries, Sunni and Shiite, looking at us and saying, wow, now that they stepped in, how can we manipulate them? Even the Russians, I can't believe the stupidity on Putin's part. He thinks he's so wise. He goes into Syria. You think he would have learned from Afghanistan? No, he goes into Syria now. As far as I'm concerned, he's stepped in you know what, and he's going to realize it after a while.
Camel stuff.
You bet.
Yeah.
I think our best bet is is to really step away from that.
Right.
And Bernie Sanders, he knows this. He's aware of this.
Right, right.
As far as he's concerned, we don't put boots on the ground, okay, unless it's a question of our own defense.
Right.
You know, we should have learned way back during the American Revolution.
Right.
The British were at a terrible disadvantage.
Right.
They went into the United States.
Right.
They went, well, it wasn't the United States then. It went into the colonies.
Yep.
Right.
It attempted to reassert its authority, and it was dealt with by guerrilla warfare. And listen, those red coats, they were easy targets.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. So here we go into an area that we're not familiar with, and we are culturally ignorant of their customs.
Exactly.
They're so easy to violate. And once you start violating the cultural customs and you start inadvertently stepping on people's toes, they want you out.
Exactly.
They want you out. So his position is pretty much no unilateral operation.
Right.
Support on occasion depending, but the Saudis and the Iranians, they have to work all that stuff out for themselves. The Turks, they have to work themselves out. They have to deal with ISIS. They have to deal with Syria.
They're the policemen of the region.
That's their region. That's their problem. I mean, we don't even need the resources there anymore. So even from a selfish point of view, we don't need to be bothered with that. We could assist with humanitarian assistance, and that's what our military should be doing. We should be doing humanitarian assistance around the world.
That's where you win people's hearts, is by helping them out through the use of through food and medicine and things of that nature, rather than shooting at them.
That's how you win over the people. And you don't have to. There's a lot of, and lives don't have to necessarily be lost. That's Bernie and his far. And then the climate change. Climate change is another one.
Of course, we've got Marty here in the studio with us, not with us, but out there doing something else. And I asked him about this. This big thing that just came out about Exxon. Now, Exxon, back in the day before ExxonMobil, before they merged, Exxon, going as far back as 1981, apparently understood that climate change was in process, that there was such a thing, that it was caused by greenhouse gases, caused by fossil fuels.
Yes, I had read that in '77, Exxon had done a study.
Yeah.
And they said that there's no question about it. That global warming is being caused by CO2 being liberated into the atmosphere. Yeah, back in '77, even earlier than...
It shouldn't be a surprise to us. Look at it. I mean, how many roads are there in the world? How many cars are on those roads? How much fossil fuel is being burned? If you have a perimeter, an area, just create any size perimeter. Then take the size of this room. What's the size of this room? You have any idea? What is it? Just give me a...
To the restaurant.
You want it in cubic centimeters?
No, cubic.
Say, 40 by 25. About 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, about 1,000 square. So we get a perimeter of 1,000 square feet, all right? And a certain animal comes into that area and decides to defecate and urinate. All right, if that animal comes in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times, the area can handle it, okay? But if this is constant, it's constant. If all of a sudden this area becomes totally putrefied, what's going to happen? You're going to have bacteria. You're going to have viruses. Okay, nature is going to want to solve this problem and put an end to the creatures that are coming in here, creating the defilement, because nature seeks balance.
So our environment has the capacity to handle a certain amount of problem issues of this nature, but to get beyond that, and it becomes more problematic and less easy more difficult for nature to absorb these things.
And rather than absorb it, nature will find a way to eliminate the problem, one way or another. Okay?
Really, it comes down to the first cut it is population. Right?
Well,
and the world population has been growing very, very rapidly over the last 50 to 100 years.
We've seen plagues in the history of the world where...
And then, in a way, sometimes we Americans are a little bit at fault because we don't recognize how difficult the lives are of some of the third world countries. And China, for example, is polluting a lot. And I know for a fact that Japan had been. I was in Japan on a business trip maybe about 20 years ago. I found myself in Yokohama, and I couldn't breathe the air. It was so bad. It was unbelievably bad.
Wow.
But what they have had to do was to provide for massive populations. And in the process, of course, the environment was set aside. The Chinese people have really destroyed the beauty, for example, of the Yangtze River. This gorgeous river with rapids and whatnot. And there were even dolphins that lived in the river, and there's hardly anything alive in that river anymore.
So we saw that with Lake Erie on our border with Canada, Lake Erie, which was in horrible condition in the 70s. And you do things in order to accommodate the environment to clean itself up, and it does.
Yeah.
It will.
But it does take time, it does take effort, it does take cutting back on, in our case now, fossil fuel consumption.
So there is, in a sense, you're saying there is this maturation, right, of cultures all over the world. And they're coming to that point, I think,
Well, here's the
where
thing.
they realize now that they cannot throw the environment to the four winds anymore, literally and figuratively, but rather they have to rein it in. And I think that there's progress being made in that. And the recognition is coming forth.
Yeah, there are solutions to these things, but we have to act in a timely fashion in order to accommodate those solutions. To allow our planet to take care of itself. I consider myself a devout Christian, and I understand that especially the younger kids, the evangelicals, they recognize that we're stewards of the land. That it's our job to take care of our planet, and it's important that we do that. And
David, the fact of the matter is, you know, if we don't take care of the planet will take care of us.
Right.
In a negative sense.
Because, you know, there is such a thing as population control. And we've limited the planet's ability to maintain population control because we have medicines, we have technology, we're able to deal with famine, we're able to deal with drought, we can put controls on war. We can control the environment in such a way that our population can flourish. But once that population starts to flourish, it's going to utilize certain resources. And if it utilizes those resources beyond a particular threshold, well, the planet will naturally try to offset what's going on. You got all that carbon in the air.
Right.
Situation is going to arise. Climate's going to change because the planet needs to control an avarice population which is attempting to do damage to it. It's in constant flux. I mean, the Earth spins around. It rotates. And it revolves around the sun like the other planets do. But then the entire solar system is moving toward the constellation Hercules, and then probably the entire Milky Way. All right, so everything is moving.
Right.
Everything is changing. It's not static. So when you create an imbalance, that imbalance has to be corrected, and it might be at the expense of the human population. Floods, weird typhoons, hurricanes.
That's an important point. Balance. I think that might be the word that sums up the need that we have to return that balance, tip that balance back in favor of the environment.
I don't think there, forgive me, but I don't think there ever was a balance. It's just that the population was lower and the technology was primitive, relatively. And now, with a huge population and technologies that are capable of pouring out enormous amounts of CO2, the thing has changed. The game has changed.
It accelerated.
Yeah, it did. And a worrisome thing is that there's a term that people use in the analysis of systems, and it has to do with something called positive feedback. And if you have a control system, you don't want positive feedback, you want negative feedback, because what happens with negative feedback is that you can keep the system under control. But if you have positive feedback and any growth in the system is fed back into the system, the growth actually pushes it further, and then you get a little bit more growth, and that's fed back in, and the system goes completely out of control. All right? And the worry is that we're approaching a point where positive feedback will take over. And a specific example of this, for example, is the polar ice caps. And if you start to melt them, what happens is the melting of those ice caps contributes to the global warming because you don't have this mass of snow and ice, which is highly reflective, right?
The two things were being reflective at the same time. That's where a lot of the concentration of carbon dioxide in the world is.
Right.
And that's released.
Right.
Like not only from the ice caps, but also from the huge amount of calcium. White Cliffs of Dover, as an example. These are areas that these contain huge amounts. They've captured a lot of carbon dioxide.
So you say it's going to be released.
It's being released, and that's part of it. You don't have the reflective powers of the ice caps throwing heat back into space.
Right. So this is we live in this hothouse, right? And the sun its energy comes down into this, and we want to
grab what we
reflect it back out.
The planet grabs what it needs and reflects the rest of it back out.
And not only the CO2 is having an adverse effect upon that, but also the shrinkage of the solar ice caps. So things can get things can get out of hand, and you have positive feedback. And the worrisome thing is that if that happens, all sorts of reining in of the production of CO2 by means of, who knows, electric cars, more efficient automobiles, the use, God forbid, of nuclear power and solar power and wind power, not producing carbon dioxide, it will be too little and too late. So that's the worry.
It may very well be too little and too late.
Interesting advertisement, and this, you see sponsored by things all across the media, but an ad couched as made to look like an informative thing by the nuclear power industry, that 62%, I think it was 62% of the non-carbon, not fossil fuel, 62% of that is taken care of by nuclear energy. But the flip side of that is that 38% is not. It's things that we're looking for, the renewable resources that don't have the damaging potential of nuclear energy. And with that, we're going to have to wrap it up. Co-host, guests, and Progressive Soup, you want to wrap it up?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for joining us for our discussion today. We have Miles Gansfried. Did I say that right?
Close enough.
Okay, Miles Gansfried, yes. And then we had Joe Niola. And we talked about, our discussion was starting out to talk about Bernie Sanders as a Democrat, and then we talked about so many issues today.
And we're out on YouTube anyway.
Yeah,
YouTube,
so thanks for
Facebook,
joining us. And Emily Lawson-Hassa, David Stevenson.
Yep.
And we'll see you next time.
Good night.
Good night. Wow, that went by